Hi, good morning.
Morning, Prof.
How are you?
Cold and you?
Okay, so let's start. I can see that most people are there already. So anyone who can remind us what we have achieved yesterday? Someone can start, then others can complete what we did on the first session. Yes, Awonke. Yes.
Okay, yes, Prof. We started briefly by discussing our understanding by you asking questions. Then we spoke of research philosophies. If I remember, then we spoke well of the quantitative and qualitative research. Then we spoke more of quantitative, where we stopped at descriptive and analytic research methods. So briefly, what we learned that I remember is quantitative and qualitative, and we talked of variables, independent and dependent variables, how it affects one another. We spoke of the study design and the action related. We had an onion. I don't remember what's the name of the onion. Okay. Where it explained starting onion. At the outset of yeah, where it started at the crest at the beginning as a research philosophy, where we spoke of quite a number of things: positivity, positivism, and realism, and others. My memory is a bit stuck at the moment, but briefly we were talking of those things.
Okay.
Yes.
Anyone who want to add on to that?
Prof, good morning.
Morning, Casey.
Yeah, maybe let me, the previous colleague, we mentioned what was done yesterday, and I would like to see how we ended up yesterday. Just to remind him. Last one was about the analytic and descriptive study, I think. Yes. And we are talking about descriptive study. It will generate the hypothesis. So it will talk about who, what, where, and when. And this analytic one, it will test the hypothesis. So one is generating hypothesis, another one is testing the hypothesis. So it will mainly deal with why and how. I think that is the last slide we talk about. Okay. So he started from the beginning. I touched the last part. So hopefully, there is the first and last part are there. Many of the middle part will come in. Thank you.
And we need someone to add in the middle part.
Yeah.
The middle part.
Yeah, there is something we discussed extensively, but you are not mentioning it. There is, before we move into epidemiological studies, there are studies that we have discussed. We spoke about experimental design, isn't it? Experimental studies.
Oh, yes.
Okay, anyone who remembers something about experimental studies?
Experimental.
You said they can be controlled and manipulated.
Experimental.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Bully. Yes.
Yes, Prof.
Yeah.
What I remember is that we spoke of research designs, and then we said there is qualitative designs, which has experimentary design or exploratory designs, and the other something theory. And then we have quantitative, which has experimental and non-experimental.
Yes.
And then we spoke on the under experimental design. We said there's a pre-test and a post-test control group. And we also spoke of factorial design, where experiments where several factors are examined simultaneously.
Yeah.
And then we moved to non-experimental designs or epidemiological designs. So where we spoke of descriptive study design as well as analytical study design, which has been covered already by Onke.
Okay. Yeah, so we spoke about experimental design, where we say that the researcher controls the situation. He can manipulate the variables, remember, and to get the outcome of interest. Then where we spoke about pre-test, post-test control group, we spoke about the post-test control group only. We spoke about factorial design. We spoke about the case series. Okay. So yes. Try to have that picture. Try to have that picture in your mind. Okay. Where we have qualitative design, if you are doing a qualitative research, and we have a quantitative design if you are doing a quantitative study. And we started by discussing a quantitative method where we have quantitative designs. Then the quantitative designs are divided in two. We have experimental design that we call true experimental design, and we have non-experimental design that we call epidemiological studies. You understand? So quantitative design are broken down to two: experimental and non-experimental. So experimental design, we spoke mainly about the four experimental design. We spoke about the pre-test, post-test control group, where we say you randomly select your participants, you allocate them in an intervention group and in a control group. Then you match them, okay, maybe according to their age or their gender. Then you do your initial assessment, your baseline assessment. Then you do an intervention. Then after the intervention, you do another assessment at the end. That's what we call pre-test, post-test control group, okay? So it can be done in different ways, but this is the general rule, how you do it. Then we say there is also an experimental design where you do the post-test assessment only. Now the post-test control group only, it means that after dividing your group into intervention group and a control group, you don't do a baseline assessment, but you just put an intervention, then you do the assessment at the end. That's what we call post-test control group only, okay? Then we say there is another category of pre-test, post-test control group, whereby instead of doing only initial assessment from the beginning before intervention and then assessment after the intervention, but you can do regular assessment even during the intervention. You can try to do various assessments. That's what we call case series. That's what we call case series. Then we also spoke about factorial designs, where you do an experimental project where you can assess various factors simultaneously. Okay, so we discussed those 4 main types of true experimental design, true experimental design. Is there any confusion that we need to clear up there before we move to non-experimental design? Is there something you are not clear about before we continue?
Prof, can I ask one thing?
Yes.
If in that case, then it looks like the question you asked me yesterday, what design looks like for me.
Yeah.
It fits more pre and post test quasi-experimental design now. Now, you see, yeah, not post test only. It looks like pre and post.
It looks like a pre and a post.
Quasi-experimental design, yeah.
Okay, that's from your work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you then clarify why you think it's a pre and post?
Because first, our participants, I still put them randomly in a group.
Yes.
Though they are in the same big group, but a small group, they were divided in many small groups, and that small group was randomly selected.
Okay.
And this is one thing. Yeah. And after this, they given them the reading materials, they read, they discuss, and they present. The intervention was done by myself in between. And before my intervention, the test was done. Then the intervention come in between. After the intervention, then again let them practice. This time they are practicing more. And then again we intervene there. We test there. So there is a selected participant. There is an intervention in between.
Yeah.
And there is a test before the intervention, then test after the intervention.
Yeah. Okay.
So it should be a test.
So it's a pre-test and post-test control group.
Yes.
Okay.
But the group is the same, but it was the after intervention and before the intervention.
Yes.
The test was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Anyone else? Do you have something you want to clarify before we continue with a non-experimental design? So those are the experimental design. And we say that the value of experimental design is mainly to try to identify causality, to try to see if really the exposure is, causing the outcome that we see. The degree of causality between the exposure and the outcome. So then we started non-experimental design. We say that non-experimental design are what we call epidemiological studies or epidemiological design. Then we say that we have 2 main groups of epidemiological design. We say that we have descriptive design and we have analytical design. So that's where we ended. Anyone can, I think Casey, you already mentioned that the descriptive studies actually help in generating hypotheses. So the aim is to describe what, who, where, when. Okay, so you are actually describing when, who, when, in relation to what. because what is like your outcome variable, you know, or dependent variable, then your independent variable are your when, your who, your where. Okay, so this is a descriptive study. Then analytic study respond to the question how and why. Okay, and the M is to test the hypothesis. It means that you have an hypothesis that you are now going to test it. So so let's look at this then. So we were here in types of epidemiological studies. We say we have descriptive and we have analytic. So the descriptive studies, those are the different types of study design under descriptive studies. You know, we have case reports, case series, incidence studies, cross-sectional studies that we also call prevalence studies, and we have ecologic studies. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different study design are all descriptive. So you can be doing a descriptive study. You can do a descriptive cross-sectional study. You can say my study design is descriptive cross-sectional, or it is a prevalence study that you call cross-sectional, or you are doing an incidence study, or you are doing a case report, you are doing a case series, ecologic study. So those are descriptive studies. So your study design is descriptive, but descriptive is still very big umbrella. Then you need to specify what is it that exactly you are doing that is under descriptive study. Then it can be either one of the 5, or case report, case series, incident study, cross-sectional design, or an ecologic study. Or your study design can then be analytic in nature. You are not doing a descriptive study. So a descriptive study, you are just describing. You are, you know, trying to generate an hypothesis. You only have research questions. Or you have an hypothesis, then you want to do an analytic study. Then analytic study can be observational or experimental. Experimental here, it's because you are going to do an intervention, some intervention, and that's what we call clinical trials. Clinical trials is an epidemiological study. It is analytical in nature, but you are going to do an intervention. In contrary to an experimental study where you do an intervention that we call clinical trials or randomized controlled trials, you know, RCT. We have observational study. Observational study, your researcher, you are not doing any intervention. So you are just analyzing findings based on the observation made. So you are not intervening, you are not giving anything, you are not influencing anything, you know. Then we have 2 major type of analytical observational study. Analytical observational study can be cohort study or case control study, okay? Then, so that's the main picture that you need to remember. Now let's start with the descriptive study. So we already discussed this yesterday. Descriptive study help you to generate an hypothesis. It answers the question what, who, where, and when. Our analytical studies help you to test the hypothesis. It answers the question why and how, okay? So to go into more details, what we need to remember is that a descriptive study characterize, it describe or it characterize who, where, or when in relation to what. You know, we spoke about what, who, where, when, but what, if we need to go into more details, what is the outcome? You know, what can be hypertension? It can be diabetes among a population. So what is the outcome? But you are then trying to describe, to characterize who, where, when, in relation to what. You understand? Now, when we say who we refer to individuals, to the participants, their characteristics, means what are their age groups, gender, their occupation, their level of incomes, and of all that, of individuals who are affected. You know, let's say you want to do a study looking at people who have uncontrolled hypertension. So you want to define who are these people? What is their age, their gender, their occupation, their level of income, you know? And you want to know where do they come from? Where do they stay? What type of residence? You know, what type of work they do? Where do they work? You know? Then you want to know when, you know? When do they were diagnosed, or when the condition was reported, or when was it tested? You know, the outcome occurred when. So you are looking at who, where, when, in relation to what. What is the outcome of interest that you are studying? Okay. So we have different types of descriptive studies. We already say that. We say we have 5 types of descriptive studies. We have, among those 4 types, we have a case report, we have case series, we have cross-sectional studies that are prevalence studies, but we also have incidence studies. Now, those 4, case report, case series, incidence studies, prevalence studies, that we call cross-sectional, they all... I didn't catch that. Could you try again? They all look at they all characterize individual participants. Okay, they all look at individual participants, but ecological studies look at the aggregate. It does not look individuals. It study the population in general. You know, let's say you want to look at the characteristics of something, maybe of a health-related risk. You are comparing Mpumalanga versus KZN, KwaZulu-Natal. So you are looking at the Mpumalanga population, and you are looking at the KwaZulu-Natal population. So this is an ecological study. You are looking at the aggregate population in general versus another one. You know, you are not looking at individual participants. Okay, so let's just see that. So in ecological study, ecological design are studies of risk modifying factors on health or other outcomes based on populations, defined either geographically or temporally. So you are looking at, you know, health risk modifying factors related to health, mainly by comparing two or more group of population. You know, the population either geographically, as I say, Mpumalanga versus KZN, or Western Cape versus Eastern Cape. So you are looking at population, you know, defined geographically, or you can look at them defined temporally. You know, you look at the winter condition and maybe summer, winter versus summer, or whatever. You know, so those are ecological design. So both risk modifying factors and the outcomes are then averaged for the population in each geographical or temporal unit and then compared using a statistical method. So whatever value you got for a specific population, it's an average of that population. You know, the average condition for a population in Mpumalanga. You know, let's say we want to study factors associated with malaria in northern KwaZulu-Natal versus Mpumalanga. You know, so we know that malaria is not highly prevalent in South Africa, but there are provinces where malaria is a big problem, where we can find some cases of malaria. So we know that in northern KwaZulu-Natal, there are people who can develop malaria. Then we have also Mpumalanga, where we can find people who can develop malaria. Now we want to see what are the factors that are associated with malaria in northern KwaZulu-Natal versus Mpumalanga. Now, we are not here in this study, the aim is not to enroll individual patient who developed malaria in KZN versus Mpumalanga. But our aim here in an ecological study is to look at factors that can affect the population in general in Mpumalanga and in northern KwaZulu-Natal, then that can lead to malaria. So we start looking at factors like temperature, precipitation, vegetation, population mobility, or number of population, you know, all that. So those are ecological design. It means that we are not dealing with individual patient, but we are looking at risk factors or health-related factors within the population in a geographically located area versus another one. So those are what we call ecological design. So an ecological design is a descriptive study that look at an aggregate of the population aggregate, not individuals, okay? So the other one is a cross-sectional study. Now, a cross-sectional study, okay, let me, before we move to a cross-sectional study, is there a problem with ecological design? Do you have any challenge with ecological studies? Is it fine? Okay, so
Yes.
if you are happy, then yes, Casey, you want to say something? Marcel?
Yes. Yeah, I'm just trying to say, if we are talking about this is a population-based study, then can it be done in the same geographical region but with different population?
Yes.
Or different ethnic group?
Yes, like a different ethnic group, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay. Thanks. So that means in the same geographical region, there should be a lot of common factor there.
Yes, there should be different factors, yes.
Yeah.
That are risk modifying factors.
Yes, there are common factors, but which may affect differently for different
There
ethnic
are
groups.
also differences, yes.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Marcel, you wanted to say something?
No, Prof.
Oh, okay.
I'm nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, so that was the first type of descriptive study. Now, the second type of a descriptive study is a cross-sectional study. I think we are more familiar with a cross-sectional study. Anyone can tell me what a cross-sectional study is?
Prof, is it a snapshot study?
Yes, a snapshot photo.
So you should, yes. So it will be done in specific time, in specific area with a specific population.
Yeah. So it's a study that you do it at a specific time in a specific area within a specific population, you know, So the purpose of a cross-sectional design is to learn about the characteristics of a population at one point in time. You know, that's why we call it a snapshot, photos snapshot. It's like a photo. You know, you just have your camera, then you take a picture. You know, so it's at one point in time, you enroll patients or participants, you want to learn about the characteristics of that population. You know, so when we say at one point in time, it does not necessarily mean to be one day. You know, it can be for a short period of time. You know, you enroll, but you enroll them once, okay? So you enroll them once. So you enroll them once and you want to study their characteristics at one point in time. So that is a cross-sectional descriptive study. Now the aim here is not to compare. You are not comparing, you don't have a group control or something. You know, the aim is to describe the characteristics of that population at one point in time. Okay, it's if you have a small group of people or a classroom or whatever, you want to enroll all of them, but if it's in a huge population, you know, then you need also to have a sample size, you know. So you work immediately with a statistician to try to calculate the sample size, and you then enroll people. You know, let's say your sample size is 100, then you start enrolling those 100 patients. Once in a time, you don't see them for the second time, there is no follow-up, nothing, okay? Then you study their characteristics at one point in time only. So the result of that will help you to produce estimate about the prevalence of a specific condition you are looking for, you know, within that population. So the objective is to determine the prevalence. So you cannot be, you cannot try to study the incidence of a disease, for example, and you say you are going to do a cross-sectional study, because cross-sectional study cannot give you an incidence. You know, the cross-sectional study gives you the prevalence, but usually people confuse. Let's say you can try to do a prevalence study several times to see the trend of a condition. Let's say you can do at one point in time, another time, another time, another time. So it still gives you point prevalence at a specific time, but it can help you to see the trend of that condition. But it does not make it an incidence study, because incidence, it's new cases only, okay? But prevalence, you see, when you want to study people with diabetes, for example, okay? So you enroll them at one specific point in time. You will find with those with diabetes or without diabetes. Now, those with diabetes, you don't know, maybe the diabetes started a long time ago. It has been an existing condition, or they are discovering it for the first time. So in the prevalence study, you have both the new and the previous cases. They are all mixed. They are all mixed, so you don't know, you are not there to try to find out whether the condition was there before or you are finding it for the first time. So you are just identifying that condition at one point in time. But in an incidence study, you are only interested in knowing who are the new cases. How many people developed this condition for the first time? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Prof.
Yes.
Does it, if you, let us take this very relevant issue now about COVID-19. If we want to know the people's interest in certain community, whether they want to get the vaccine first, or they are not interested with the vaccine, but they want to the medicine. So if we want to see whether they want to the vaccine or they want to the medicine after Corona, Does it fit with cross-sectional study?
Or you want, what do you want to study? You want to study their perception?
Yeah, I just want to see their perception and their attitude or knowledge about this vaccine.
Yes.
Because people who are not interested in vaccine, there are people who are dying for the vaccine.
Yeah. So a study where you want to study, if you want to study people's knowledge, attitudes, practice, or whatever, it's also it's a cross-sectional design. You know,
okay.
At that specific point in time, you want to find out whether they prefer